All right, my friends, welcome back. Glad you've stuck it out to mood disorders. We're going to look at that particular category next. This is one of the most common of the sets of disorders that we're going to be taking a look at. Probably something that you guys are familiar with. Uh, just anecdotally, maybe people you know, people you've heard of, even characters you've seen on TV dealing with mood disorders. Uh, I like to call these country music disorders simply because there's an old joke that says, "What do you get if you play a country music song backwards? You get your house back, you get your wife back, you get your dog back, you get your car back." Um, because an awful lot of those songs, especially if you look back at some of the Hank Williams stuff, are dealing uh, with depression and down moods. So as we take a look, we've got three types. Actually, four types we're going to take a look at. We're going to look at something called dysthymic disorder. We're going to look at major depression. We're going to look at mania, and then something called bipolar disorder. These are really serious disorders. The interesting thing is, one out of every three people that have this are actually going to go to the doctor and get treatment. Statistics tell us that two-thirds of people who suffer from a mood disorder won't get treatment for it. Now, in most cases, that just kind of extends symptoms, can interfere with life enjoyment, things like that. In certain instances, though, that can lead to serious consequences. Women, gals, you're twice as likely to get depression as males. Now that could be our fault. That wouldn't shock me a bit if it was just guys. We can be a little frustrating. That could be the cause of that. Actually, there are a couple of types that are pretty much female only types that we'll take a look at this year. Projections were that this would be the mood disorders would be the number two cause of lost years of a healthy life. It was going to overtake, I believe, heart disease. I'll show you just how serious that is. Just right there behind cancer and before heart disease. So the lost years of a healthy life. There's also a lot of numbers out there about productivity. I'm going to have you do a little activity where you go out and find some answers, some statistics about mood disorders for me about different places, and you're going to see that is it's a serious disorder, or this category of disorders is a serious one for people to deal with. The first type that we've got is something called dysthymic disorder. Now, when I searched depression on Google Images, this young man popped up. I don't know that he's actually depressed. As the father of a teenager myself, I've actually seen this look, maybe that same haircut as well. And so that is something that could be fairly common. This is more commonly known as moderate depression. It's going to affect between 4 and 12% of the population a year. I know what you're thinking. That's a really bad statistic, 4 to 12%. But 4% are going to go to the doctor for it. They think it's closer to 12% will struggle with it. I've got a list of symptoms there for you. Lack of energy, unhappiness. Now, this is a persistent group of those things. It's perfectly normal to be unhappy in certain situations. I think that's something we can kind of relate to in the current situation that we all find ourselves in as we're dealing with the quarantining from the coronavirus, that sort of thing. Hopefully, if you're listening to this after this one particular group has gone through, you're like, oh, hey, I remember when that happened. That was amusing and it ended really quickly. But here in April of 2020, it's sure not looking that way. Biggest one here on this list is loss of interest. If somebody loses interest in something that they really like to do before, that's an excellent sign that they may be dealing with a dysthymic disorder. And so if you've got a couple of these symptoms, again, most of us just aren't going to go to the doctor and say, I'm just feeling sad today. Uh, but if this is a persistent mood, this is something that's going to last um, for weeks. Then you're probably in the category of needing to go and get a little bit of help. Different kinds of therapies you can take for this. Obviously, there's medication. The risk with medication is it's hard to get off those medications once you've gotten onto those medications. Um, there are also counseling techniques, things like that, that people can use. And like I said, there are perfectly valid reasons to be suffering from this. You know, the loss of a loved one. Um, you know, the loss of social connections in something like this this pandemic. There's things that can certainly send people into uh, these types of spirals. It's just trying to effectively help them to get out. The There are a couple of specific types that I've listed here, and I'll put some videos up for these. One is postpartum depression. That's something, ladies, that you struggle with sometimes once you've had a baby. There's some very famous people, Courtney Cox, Gwyneth Paltrow, Brooke Shields, who have talked about their struggles with postpartum depression, just as those uh, the body's kind of shifting over from being pregnant to not. You've got some hormonal shift that's going on there. You've also been through a physical trauma. Babies are keeping you up. You're not getting sleep, that kind of stuff. And so it's a situation that is fairly ripe for uh, for some type of mental disturbance. The other type is seasonal depression. Seasonal depression hits in the wintertime in places where the days get shorter. You don't see as much sunshine. Um, you'll see seasonal depression. I'll link videos for you about each of those onto this abnormal psychology playlist. The second type I want to highlight is major depression. Major depression, you've got all the symptoms of a dysthymic disorder, but you've also got almost a physical slowing down of these people. They start to talk slower. They lose their appetites. The biggest thing here is that these people will be dealing with can be at risk for suicide attempts. Probably most famously recently, a guy named Robin Williams, who was this comedian. Everybody thought this really funny guy, but just nobody really knew he was struggling with this outside of his family. And then just all of a sudden, um, he commits suicide. Um, and so that can be an issue with major depression. With the major depression, you don't get a whole lot of warning that that's going to happen. We're going to see when we talk about personality disorders in a couple of videos that can be a little bit more of an issue. But that's a risk for people with major depression. The third type, because we've been really kind of bummered here to begin with, is what is called mania. People with mania have extreme up moods. Um, these people are the opposite of being depressed. These people have high energy. They can go on 3 or 4 hours sleep a night. They're agitated. They're restless. They can't concentrate on anything, but they are the life of the party. Problem with being manic is a lot of times ideas that wouldn't sound very good to you in one context start to sound good. And so that can be dangerous. People can wake up with empty bank accounts in places that they don't know where they're, how they got there. Um, in these things, and most of the time with these we call them episodes. So you're having a manic episode. Problem is your body can't run for an indefinite amount of time in those manic episodes, and so um, usually there's a crash that follows that. Again, if you suffer from mania, you're not manic all the time. There are certain things that will send you into manic episodes. The last type that we've got is what's called bipolar disorder. If you're going to miss anything on the test, it's going to be this one, because bipolar disorder is a mix of depression and mania. And usually what people will do is they'll tell me about one, but they don't tell me about the other. Manic depressive disorder means that you have episodes of mania followed by episodes of depression. Now, those can happen very quickly. That's a little rarer where people will bounce back and forth between the two. Uh, Something usually, though, will set people off into a manic episode, which may last a number of days. Then there's a crash that follows, and they'll go into a depressive or even a major depressive episode, and then um, that will last for a number of days or weeks. But imagine kind of the rough part of this one is feeling as good as you've ever felt at one point in your life, and then as bad as you've ever felt very quickly thereafter. These folks can be a little bit of a risk to keep medication uh, regular, uh, sometimes because they like themselves when they're manic. Sometimes, during those particular times, um, there's no motivation to take those things either in the manic state or the depressive state. But bipolar disorder or manic depressive disorder is a mix of those two. Like I said, it can happen really quickly where people bounce back and forth. It's much more common for it to be more of a slow process that these folks are going to go through. So I'm going to link some videos for you on the playlist again, so you can get an idea of what patients would look like with these different disorders. But those are mood disorders.